Well, we can elaborate a little bit more on capitalism. So, I remember in my international political economy class, I was going to do a paper on Adam Smith versus Ibn Khaldun, because I was intrigued by the fact that Ibn Khaldun had coined certain ways to capitalism prior to Adam Smith. And so, would you say that there's elements within capitalism that are not completely opposed to Islam? And what we're seeing today is like an ultra extremist form of capitalism kind of thing? Or would you say that, I don't know if you can elaborate on that point for
this. So the question is, what is there a commonality between capitalism and Islam in terms of the laws and the rules? And see, there is always commonalities between systems. So for example, it's illegal in Islam to kill an innocent person, right? And it's also illegal in capitalism to kill an innocent person. But the way we should look at it is you should look at it from a comprehensive aspect and not look at just one ruling. Because what sets the tone, what sets the whole system is really the big picture and not the little, or not each individual rule by itself. So when you look at Islam, when you look at the economic system of Islam, you'll find that Islam has very specific rules and laws about economics. So monetary policy, what is money? Where does money come from? How do you regulate money? How do you build a state? How do you get revenues for that state? How do you spend the revenues? What are the sources? So all these things are basically detailed and are revealed in Islam. And when you look at capitalism on the other hand, you will find that the system is totally different. Capitalism is based on private entities amassing wealth. And all the laws and all the systems are done in a way to allow these entities to accumulate as much wealth as possible. So when we look at for example, how the whole debt-based currency system and how this creates enormous amount of wealth to the bankers in terms of interest payments. Like if you imagine all the money out there, imagine the debit accounts of all look at a single country, for example, and look at all the businesses, all the municipal governments, all the provincial government, the federal, provincial, look at all the debit cards of all these people, all their bank accounts, and imagine 2 or 3% a year on all this dollar value. It's huge, right? So the system is really built around focusing power in the hands of a certain people. So I would not say that Islam. What I would say is Islam is very far from capitalism in terms of its systems.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think one of the things that might come to surprise people in general is that when socialism was in vogue in the Muslim world, the way they try to sell it to the Muslims is that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is the master of socialists. And that seems really strange right now because we live in a capitalist-dominated world, right? But they're trying to do the same thing with capitalism, right? They try to say, oh yeah, Islam is from capitalism, and capitalism is from Islam, and these types of things. But it's one of the kind of points of deception, as I pointed to that quote earlier from the CIA agent Graham Fuller. They spread these kind of concepts on purpose, and that where Islam and capitalism fundamentally disagree is right at the Aqidah level. What capitalism is it's an accurate description of the system, but where it emanated from is the idea of freedom of ownership. Freedom of ownership means, as that ayah, which I find amazing every time I kind of think about it, what the people complained to Shuaib alayhi salam was, your religion tells us what we want to do with our property, right? And that's fundamentally the disagreement between Islam and capitalism, is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you what to do with your property. He subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best, and He can tell human beings what to do with their property. And that's why they disagree with Islam. And I use that as a very light term. That's why they're fighting. That's what the war in Syria is about. That's what all these tools and these things they're doing across the Muslim world is about. That's what they don't want. The battle of hearts and minds. When they talk about that, what they're talking about is that we Our hearts and minds are with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? Not with them, right? Everyone else is with them, right? So I just want to kind of tie it back to right to the Aqidah, because that's the fundamental, where the fundamental clash happens, and there's just no way to compromise, or there's no common ground between the Muslims and the capitalists. Welcome.
Just the second part of the question, I know it's okay. So I was having a discussion recently with a brother, and he said that capitalism is a dominant system and we have to work with it, et cetera, et cetera. I was trying to come up with a response, and he said that people are better off today than they were previously, which I knew sounds fishy. So I don't know if you could comment. How would you personally answer that question? Because the capitalists, they have a lot of these responses, right? The PR things that they often say that we're better off today and we're progressing and things like that. But we can see the huge disparity between poor obviously.
Yeah, so this is the point where we touched upon that there's a huge wealth inequality. And when you look at something being just or oppressive, you don't look at, does it make me money or does it not make me money? Am I rich or not? This is not how we measure justice and oppression. And the people that come at it from this angle, their entire premise is flawed. The judgment, what they're using to judge, their measuring scale is wrong. So they come up with a wrong answer. And for Muslims, for us, when we look at something to determine if it's just or oppressive, we take it back to Islam to see if it's just or oppressive. Not does it make me money, or does it make me rich, or does it make me comfortable. And the other part to answer this question too is we are living in the power centers of capitalism, so we're living comfortably. But you don't see the 90% of the other people that are living a very miserable life, almost barely surviving. So, like I said before, if you were living in the palace of Pharaoh, at the time of Moses, you would be very comfortable. You would have all the things you want to, wealth and women and everything. But that doesn't make Pharaoh to be just. That doesn't make him good. That doesn't make him right. So as Muslims, we don't look at things based on the capitalist view. And the problem is that some people they come with the capitalist idea, which is wealth and power and property, and then they try to implement this measuring scale and use it to determine if it's good or bad, if this system is good or bad. And as Muslims, we don't use this measuring scale. And the reality is actually capitalism creates huge poverty, creates a huge amount of poverty. Its effects are very tremendous in terms of the global poverty and wealth inequality and wars and all these things. If somebody says these comments, they don't really understand the political reality of capitalism and what's happening around them. And they have a wrong basis that they're using to measure justice and oppression.
The other side of it is that what you should also bring up to the brother is that, is it allowed to work with the capitalists? Do we have permission from the legislator, from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who created us from dust? Do we have permission from him subhanahu wa ta'ala to work with these people? If he so subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us permission, then no problem, right? But if he didn't, then what are we going to tell Allah on the Day of Judgment, right? So as I discussed in my presentation, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was facing annihilation. Like we're not sugarcoating it, right? Like when he was put in the what they call the boycott, I think a more accurate portrayal of that is the Muslims and the Banu Hashim was put in concentration camps. Did he sallallahu alaihi wasallam compromise even an atom because of that? Because of the price he had to pay sallallahu alaihi wasallam? Right? He was choked sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the best of all creation, was choked because of his refusal to compromise, right? So when we are living comfortably and we're saying that this is fine and we can compromise, how on earth is that remotely connected to the sacrifices that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the Sahaba, may Allah be pleased with them, all made, right? If he sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the Sahaba, Sumayya, may Allah be pleased with her, who was martyred for this, if that is the path, that is the measuring stick, right? That's what we have to do, and that's why it's important to connect back. What we're doing is always to, is this halal and haram? This idea that you look at results is something that comes from capitalism. It's not from Islam. Islam, what you do is look at your action. Is it correct? And how are you going to fare on the Day of Judgment? That is the only criterion you look at when you look at an action, right? And it's important to make that point, right? Not to look at whether capitalism is doing good or bad, or Pharaoh is doing good or bad, or communism is better. The question is what am I doing? And is that going to make me successful on the Day of Judgment? Yeah.
A question based on, you know how when you want to get a loan for a house, you need like 300,000 or maybe a business or something. In Islam, like in this capital system, the incentive for somebody to loan you is because they get money back from it. Because nobody's going to give you $300,000 if they get nothing back. So in Islam, how would they tackle this? Like what incentive would people have to loan out hundreds of thousands of dollars to regular people?
Do you want to take it or me take it?
Sure. You come to So the question is, how do you how do you buy a house under the Islamic system, and how do you get a loan to buy a house for $200,000-$300,000, and what's the incentive of somebody giving you a loan if they can't make interest or money from the loan? And that answer to this question is it's very hard for us to imagine how the Islamic or living under the Islamic system would be, because all our lives we've only lived under the capitalist system. So every time we try to think of a problem, we come up with the problems that exist in this system and then try to find a solution for it in Islam. But in Islam, the problems that exist, like the problems that exist because of capitalism, don't exist in the Islamic system. So in the Islamic system, it would be very, very common for every family to own land and to own properties and to own a lot of things. It would be very common for people to have wealth. It would be very common for you, like the prices, for example, in the Islamic State, could be that the house would be worth $30,000, which you can probably work for 2 years and save up and buy and build a house. Like when you look at the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, building a mosque was nothing. Was not even a big deal. It was just like a couple of days and that was done. Building houses was really not an issue. And when you look at the issue with houses here, for example, the price of the land is a huge aspect of the problem. So the land alone, the cheapest lot could be $100,000, for example, and the problem is because the access to land and the whole system makes land very expensive, right? But in Islam, when you look at a rule like rule iqta', for example, where the state gives land to the people, if there's land that's not used and you go and build a fence on this land, it becomes yours. It's free. Go build a house on it or go build a farm or whatever. So access to land and being able to get land under the Islamic system is very easy. So all you have to do is basically just save up some money and build a house. It could be maybe working for a couple of years and you have a house, So these questions these problems that exist in this system will not exist in the Islamic system.
So just to add just a little bit of anecdotal observations is that, for example, in Lebanon, when they brought in riba, houses went up 6 times the price. And this brother we know very well, some of us here, he was explaining that to us, is that when riba came in, it jacked up the prices of housing. So what Kareem was saying is actually backed up by factual reality, is that when you introduce riba, you have to kind of see what is the impact, right? And what riba and what the capitalist system, what drives up the housing prices is speculation, right? What happens which is enabled through loans, getting loans, and having leverage in terms of buying out. Just on a different note, when it comes to businesses, the main way that businesses will acquire capital is through partnership contracts, which is it's not like a corporation. So it's like it requires personal involvement, where you give your offer and acceptance, you work with other partners, and then you determine the profit sharing based on that. But it's not a artificial personality like the corporation is. It's Malik and Kareem have a partnership together. We work together. And if we decide to go our separate ways, we just dissolve the company and move on. But that company doesn't exist without Kareem and Malik, right? Like it's an agreement between the two of us. And it's amazing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He built this into the system, where the contracts don't have a life outside the people. Like it seems kind of basic, But this hukum from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala prevented the birth of corporations, right? Okay, and this goes back to, just to emphasize this concept of hidayah and guidance. When we say, when we say ihdina as-sirat al-mustaqim over 17 times a day, this is part of that guidance that the human beings are lacking today, right? So if you watch, there's a movie that came out a while ago, it's called The Corporation, and like the activists who hate corporations are talking about how this came to be and how they exploited. It was basically like a slavery law that they kind of, the capitalists, with their elder lawyers and stuff, figured out a way to use loopholes to make get rights for corporations. And most recently, corporations have the right of free speech. Is that in Islam it inhibited this type of thing. So what the partnership structure does is it enables people with wealth to partner with entrepreneurs, to share in the profits. But what it inhibits is the corporate monstrosities that we see roaming and destroying the planet today.
Any more questions? Okay, jazakallah khair, guys.
Jazakallah khair.